Welcome everyone to the next segment in our Breaking into Data series. So I'm Aaron Falus, for those of you who are new, haven't seen me before. I mean, obviously I prefer to do these things in person. Those of you who've come before all know that. But I'm the founder of Promotable, also Breaking into Data as well. And so we do things like this about once a week, and sometimes even more frequently. But our goal really is to help fill that data skills gap, help you learn those next couple of skills that you need, and really see how from different perspectives. So we'll have folks here from e-commerce, from hard tech, from things like Caterpillar, McDonald's. So really just to give you all of those extra perspectives to help you break into data, learn how to cut through some of that jargon and really start to make better data-driven decisions. So we do that, of course, through events like this. And then, of course, what drives the business and what pays the bills is we also have data analytics courses. So all of our classes, all of our instructors are just like Vince, all current practitioners, people who do this every single day. So those are 5 hours a week, learn things like SQL, Tableau. Anyone's interested, you can feel free to drop something in the comments. You can ping me, aaron@promotable.io. Or feel free to reach out to us any other way. We've got Twitter and all the other social channels. While you're on LinkedIn, if you do enjoy these, it'd be really helpful to go onto our Promotables page and just give me a like. It's a small thing, but for us, it's really helpful. And with that, we're going to kick it off. So introducing Vincent Walsh. So Vince is a senior data strategist at Newsot. Did I butcher that?
No, that's right, Newsot.
Yeah, okay, I got it right. Okay, so I'm we're gonna go through a couple of questions here, and while that's going on, I'm gonna ask everyone to go ahead and put your questions either in the comments, or you can also tweet us as well. I'm just pulling up a second screen here so I can see the questions as they come in. And feel free, you don't have to wait until the very end. Feel free to throw your questions on there, and we'll start getting to them. Okay, so just kind of kicking it off. So tell me a bit about what you do now. I apologize that the title was on your old company, but tell me a little bit more about Newsot and what's a data strategist.
No worries. I only joined Newsot 7 weeks ago, so it's still pretty new. But essentially, I work on the consulting side of the company. My title is data strategist. And what I do is, when our clients have data issues, they reach out to us, and I'm the first person on the ground. So I'm the first boots on the ground that goes into the company. And my job is really to figure out what their problems are. We take a design thinking approach to their data strategy. So we're working a lot with, all the people who have, who touch data, who use data, visualize data at the company. And, by the end of the projects, we, figure out what their problems are and we build a path to success.
Awesome. I mean, I think one of the challenge I think a lot of people have, I think you touched upon this, so I'm going to jump right in. Like when you start talking to a client, is the first question, is it a data question, or do you start asking, like, I think to your point, what's the problem, and then kind of start looking for whether it's a tool or something else?
Yeah, it's rarely a data question, because a lot of the people, so my first couple weeks on a project will be just interviewing any stakeholder that's involved, and usually I'm asking them about their goals first. So their strategic goals, the company's goals, what they want to accomplish in the next 6 months or the next year. And, the conversation goes into, like, let's talk about your ideas, right? Like, what do you, if you had all the budget in the world, what's something that you want to implement? And, my job is really to pull out the things that are related to data from the things that they tell me. Right, because I'm not going in and talking to data scientists. Like, I'm talking to someone in IT or someone in finance or someone in marketing. Generally, a lot of these people, don't have data skills. Like, they're not pulling data on a daily basis. They're not in Tableau or some other visualization tool. They might be consumers of data, or other things like that. But generally they don't have those skills. So it's really my job to figure out, okay, where are their pain points based on the goals that they're telling me, and the issues that they have reaching those goals. So once I hear about their goals a little bit, we'll get into their direct pain points and what's in the way of getting them to there. And again, I do the same thing. I pick out the parts that data could make easier, whether that's access to data or collecting new data, maybe transforming data that they already have, or building new reports that they don't currently have access to.
Cool. Yeah, I mean, that kind of brings us down to one of the other questions I've got for you. But so you're kind of that guy in the middle, right? You sit between the folks with the business problems, and then either kind of doing that transformation or what have you yourself, or sending that off to your data teams to do all the heavy lifting if there's a lot of coding involved. But you weren't always a data guy necessarily. Tell me about what that looks like. How do you go from someone like me? I was an operations guy, or I have a lot of friends who might be in marketing. I know a lot of times a lot of people talk about transitioning careers or transitioning roles. I feel like it doesn't happen overnight, but tell me a little bit about like how you went from kind of consulting or like a more sales focused role to being a data lead. I mean, that's like the dream job for a lot of people.
Yeah, and it's actually an interesting story. I mean, to be honest, I wasn't even a tech guy my first job out of college. I was an econ major, and I got a job essentially in sales support at a small mortgage company. And I wasn't really passionate about the mortgage industry at all, but I was good at finding problems within the organization. Specifically in that role, I noticed that we weren't using, the company wasn't using a CRM. I did some research and suggested that we implement Salesforce. My boss liked it, implemented it, and then I had the epiphany at, as we were going through that process. This was before Salesforce was humongous, or as big as it is now, at least. So you were doing a lot of the implementation like on your own. Like they give you access to the product and you kind of build it up. So I was going through that. I was like, man, I really like this. Once I was finished, it was like, well, it was much cooler, implementing that software. And so I should find a job where I do that. And that's where I made the jump into consulting. And it still wasn't necessarily data. A lot of the things I did at that first job, did have to do with data. I actually built a few visualizations in Excel at the time, but I still didn't notice that was sort of my core skill. Something else I noticed at that job was I said I wasn't a tech guy at all. Well, when I got into that position, I realized I was much more of a tech person than anyone else at the office, like by far. Just something I kind of grew up with, I guess, liking computers and working on them a lot. And it just so happened that not a lot of other people in the office had those skills. So, people were coming to me to fix their problems. Once I got into consulting, this is where I started building my data skills. So what that company did was a lot of work for public utility companies, specifically their accounting, which sounds super boring. But it's cool because public utility companies have a ton of data. If you imagine a water company, you're paying a water company, and it's, in essence, you're paying them rent for the pipes that they own that are in the ground that get water from a lake to your faucet. And so they have to keep track of all of those pipes. And you can imagine how many of them there are, just in your own neighborhood. And then imagine that times 1,000, because most water companies work for an entire city. So I just kind of fell into this job where all of a sudden I needed to use SQL, and I needed to get good at it. And I had no SQL skills at the beginning. That was understood when I went in, and my boss at the time essentially taught me SQL. And so that's where a lot of my core data skills came from. And then, after doing that for a few years, I wanted to be even closer to technology. Still didn't recognize that, data was the actual thing I liked. But I switched into, a tech company at Here Technologies. And, my job there initially was building out like executive KPI visualizations. And, I had learned Tableau just kind of on the side at my last company. We were rarely doing visualizations, but I thought they were cool. So I just kind of started learning Tableau. Turns out at my next company, I used Tableau all the time and, became one of the top Tableau people in the company. And, it wasn't until probably 2 years into that company where I was like, you know what? I need to start getting into actual data positions because this is what I was good at. I flirted with the possibility of going into product and then was like, I have a lot of skills in data. People come to me for their data problems. Like this is, my core skill. And I need to start recognizing that and going after roles that, the core responsibility of the role has to deal with data. I started doing that, liked it a lot, so much in fact that I wanted to join a company that is, full on data only. And that's what I've done at Newsot. So I know that was a long answer to your question, but I started off not even in tech and sort of worked my way, into data by just figuring out what I like doing and what I was good at.
Which, makes a lot of sense. I can definitely speak from experience of having to learn by doing and figuring out what works. We've got a question here from Ravi, and he asked if you have made the switch while you were at Here to doing a lot of data strategy type work. He didn't ask, he asked that, but also whether that was formally making like your title or job description, or if that was just something that, if that did happen, if that was more formal.
It was actually formal. So I was working on a business planning team when I was hired, and it was like the central business planning team, and they needed a bunch of visualizations. I actually would then help other departments with their visualizations a few years in. We had a really cool talent platform that you could sort of pick up side projects within the company and help people. So I would, keep my eyes on that for projects that were available. So that was all the informal stuff. 2 years in, I actually made it formal. We started standing up like a centralized analytics team. The goal of the team, at least at the beginning, was, around data governance and a lot of data engineering. We were using data virtualization to connect a lot of our sort of disparate apps within the organization and, build out data governance around that so that we could enable people using data within, on the rest of the company. I got on that team because, of all these connections that I made with just building visualizations. And that's, my role was lead analytics strategy. It's kind of a mouthful, sorry. Lead data strategy and data strategy and analytics lead. There it is.
Yeah, it's a mouthful. We've got
so that was my role, and like I said, we were focused on data governance and building that sort of center of excellence for the rest of the company, and trying to get more people like myself actually, pre-roll to sort of dive into analytics and make that easier for them.
We'll definitely touch upon that in a little while, because I think that's super interesting. I noticed we have a few folks, at least in the comments, who've posted, who are either going through coding boot camps or data science boot camps, or trying to teach themselves one way or the other. And I know that you went through a similar process. Tell me a little bit more about, we've all been through school and had to learn stuff on the job, and like kind of having done both here while you're at Here. What kinds of stuff do you think they didn't teach you well at the class you took, or kind of what do you think that like you had to learn on the job that you think like would have been really helpful to learn during that class?
That's a really good question. some people might laugh at this, but I think, the ability to Google the right things is really, really important. And, it was talked about in some of the classes that I took, but the only way you're going to get better at it is by actually, doing projects and trying to get through things on your own. And so like, I actually see that as a really good skill because, especially when you're working with Python and R, if you know what the codes are capable of and how to talk about them with the right terms, you'll have a much easier time searching Google for blog posts on, how to do certain things. It'll make your life a lot easier. I mean, I've been learning Python for like a year and a half, maybe. The first year was sort of on and off. Lately, I do, at least 30 minutes of a boot camp per day. But I don't expect that just going through that boot camp is going to, I'm not going to come out of there knowing how to, do data science in Python. You're really going to learn by doing projects. Now, hopefully someone's paying you to do a project, but obviously not all of us can be that lucky. So sometimes you got to find stuff that you're just passionate about that you can do on the side. Maybe you like the stock market. So pick a stock and try to find a way, try to find some data that helps you predict how that stock moves. That's something that you could do on the side on your own. Data's, readily available. And that will, as you sort of write out how you're going to solve that problem, and finish that project, you'll write out semantics code or stuff.
Sounds like
that's when you start like Googling things and figuring out, like I remember that one chapter on loops. I probably need a for loop here. So now I know I need to type for loop in my search query, but what else do I need? How am I going to do that?
And then you find yourself on Stack Overflow.
Exactly. I mean, when you're going through the boot camp, like if you're in the loops chapter, the answer to any question they're going to ask you is going to involve some type of loop, right? So it's kind of cheating in a way that you have that knowledge. When you're doing a project on your own, you don't have, nobody's telling you how to solve the problem. Nobody's telling you the pattern that you need to use to solve that problem. So, you have to search out there, and I guarantee someone else has done it before. So you'll find, several different answers to your question, especially with, packages, or especially with languages like R and Python, who, they have, an endless amount of libraries. So there's, 1,000 ways to skin a cat with those languages. So you'll find, different answers to the questions that you have. And you want to make sure that you get the one that works for you and that you understand.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it sounds like a lot of the stuff that you get, whether it's on projects or what have you, is really you learn, some hard skills through your classes, and then kind of learning that context, which is so hard. Actually,
you want to learn like what you can do. And this goes for software or language or coding languages. Like you want to know, or you want to understand what the software, what the language can do and what it's capable of, what its like core competencies are. Mm-hmm. And then, Google the rest as you go. That won't make you an expert for a long time. Obviously, I'm sure someone with a PhD would hate that answer because they're like, they spent 1,000 years in school becoming experts at these things. But, it's worked for me. And, I'm a lifelong learner, so I'm never going to stop learning. Yes, it wasn't formal education most of the time. But that's how I approach those types of issues.
Which is really cool. I mean, I think we had someone who asked if you had any formal training. I think clearly you've had a little bit, right? It's kind of that. A little bit of both. Someone asked, I'm not sure the exact context, but she asked, or LinkedIn user asked, which software products did you recommend to, they asked it to make the jump. I think they mean to learn data or learn that transition. So whether it's like, I don't know, Code Academy or whatever. And I'm not sure if there's a good answer that you have for that, but.
So when I first started, I think I was using some classes on Khan Academy. Mm-hmm. Now, at the beginning of the pandemic, Data Camp ran like a $175 for a year's access.
Mhm.
So I decided to pay them and do that. And so DataCamp is the one that I do every day. I've been learning Python. I'm on like the data scientist track, halfway through, very happy with it. A chapter is about 30 minutes a day. And that keeps, my skills tightened, I think. Being a data scientist is not part of my job, and nor is it what I think I'm striving to be. But knowing that those, understanding those skills really helps me as a data strategist, because, I will understand what a data scientist needs. I understand the inputs needed, for them to build models and other things like that. So it's something that I definitely, want to keep up to date on and want to keep learning.
Yeah, no, that dovetails nicely into one of the questions I had, and I've got Sam Benedictson. Apologize if I messed up your name, Sam. But he asked, how would you describe the difference in responsibilities between your role here as a data lead and a data strategist? My second part to that question is really, I think, if you could elaborate on the different kinds of data roles there are, because most of us are told data scientist, maybe data analyst, machine learning engineer. That's it. But there's so many, and I think there's a lot of roles where there might not even be the word data in it. Like if you're in marketing, you deal with data all the time, but you probably don't have the title. But kind of how all those things relate.
Yeah, absolutely. So to answer the first question, the biggest difference between my job at Here and my job now was at Here it was industry side, and now I'm consulting side. And I guess what I mean by that is at Here, I still consider that I was doing strategy work, but it was sort of never ending. So like I was, leading the data project eternally, basically.
Mm-hmm.
There wasn't like a start or finish to the project, and I wasn't going at the problem with a methodology or a framework in mind. Before I was doing things, it was just sort of like, problems come up and I solve them. We put in processes in place like that as we go. As a consultant, or being on the consulting side of Newsot, we have a process for getting a company, up and from zero to full-on data roadmap for the next 3 years, and we have a framework and we have a process that we go through, and we take the company through to teach them, what that looks like and how to do things. So there's a lot more advising and a lot more teaching in my new job, and we're able to use our framework to solve problems, where at Here I didn't really have that stuff. It was a lot more like learning on the go. When you ran into a database that you've never seen before, you kind of just had to figure out how you were going to solve the problem for that particular database.
Actually,
now that
we'll cut you off for a second here.
Yep.
Because we have another question that really fits perfectly here, and I think perfectly with what originally we were talking about, discussing about big companies and silos. Ravi was asking, how do you create like a central data strategy when your data is spread across different locations or business units, and the actual work is siloed within units? And they also asked how important is the alignment of business goals and objectives kind of to that work.
Yeah, well, I think the best way to do that is pay a consulting company $1 million and have 100 people come in and write integrations from every single application into a centralized data warehouse. But obviously, not everybody can do that. That was the biggest issue that we had at Here. You nailed it right on the head with the problem that we were trying to solve. And how we did it was with data virtualization. This is very similar to a process of writing integrations between an app or an API. If the app has a database, the database to a centralized data warehouse. But with data virtualization, you don't have to actually write that integration. You just have to connect to the database or the API, or the hosted Excel document, whatever has the data, through the virtualization engine. The one we used was called Denodo. There are other ones out there. And what data virtualization does is it acts, it has its own, Denodo calls it VQL, virtual query language. You write queries into Denodo, and Denodo sort of points that query, rewrites it based on where the data actually lives on its own. So that's the service it's providing. It's like a, on-the-go integration, and it queries those databases and pulls all the data into one place for the consumer, whether that's a Tableau app or a person just trying to get a data set. And the other positive that this provided to us was, we didn't have a data governance strategy in place, but as we brought new applications from different departments onto this platform, we had them go through a data governance process. And what I mean by this is, we had them tell us, okay, you just pointed us to a database with 100 tables. What are the most important tables from this database? The ones we need for reporting and the ones you need for reporting, or the ones that could be combined with data somewhere else in the organization. We're only going to bring those onto the platform, and we want you to define every single field that's coming on. So you're taking a 100 table database with, let's say average 15 fields each table, and you're coming out of it with maybe 10 important tables. And so you're only having to define 150 fields. And it makes it a much more manageable issue to solve when you don't have 100 consultants to fix the problem. And, like I said, it provides two great things, which is, a healthy data governance strategy and a way to combine data from different, applications that are, all over the place within the organization.
That is a very, very good answer. We have one more question from Ricardo, which I think touches back on one of your comments earlier. He asked if it's too late to switch into data as a 50-year-old. He's currently a quality manager, but I think the broader question is it ever too late to start learning some data and using it?
I don't think so at all. Actually, I took a General Assembly course, part-time, twice a week for 10 weeks data science course. And I think there were, out of the 15 people that were in the class, I think 5 of them were probably over 50. And they were thinking about the same thing. Some of them just saw how important data was, within their department. And they said, hey, I need to get my department to go in this direction. So I want to learn more about it, or I want to move to a company that, same sort of world that I'm in, but with more focus on data. So yeah, I definitely don't think it's too late. There's definitely jobs out there, but you have to have a story of why you're doing that. And, for any job switch, you can't make a complete jump. Mm-hmm. You asked in the beginning how I got into data, and it wasn't, mortgage company into data strategist. It was mortgage into, tech implementation into tech, building. And then, the transition happened within the company, and then I moved to another company. And so the easiest job change to make is, with the company that you have now. And the hardest one is always going to be jumping ship and going to another company.
Yeah, no, that's a really good point. I know for promotables classes, for all the stuff that we teach, my first question to anyone who's even considering taking a data science class or a data analytics class or anything is why are you here? Why do you want to do this, right? Is it because you're looking to angle for a particular kind of role? Do you want to be in marketing analytics, or is it you want to look at Starbucks, right? It's all about finding that story, because then when you're talking about it, you can say, oh, I went and I wanted to work at Starbucks, so I pulled data on U.S. coffee consumption stats. or the percentage of Starbucks stores or whatever it is, right? You just want to be able to about it so you can show the work. So you're not just because I think there's a lot of people who will do like some Udemy class, watch a video, and then they'll say, I did this thing, and the project is like the same project that 10,000 other people have done. But if you can tell the story and make it personal, I think it's really a real win. We've got, here's a good question. I think we have a lot of folks who are either going through courses or recent grads, and everyone wants a leg up or wants to learn how to differentiate themselves. So I'm sorry, Bargavi, I'm sorry I mispronounced your name, but he asked, what sort of skills do you look for, do you evaluate when you're talking about like a fresh grad? Like in Chicago, we have a lot of folks who come out, who get like master's in analytics degrees, DePaul, UIC, Institute of Tech. How do you look at people who either came out of a boot camp or like a master's degree in data science, but don't have that hard experience yet?
Yeah, I mean, I'm more worried about their interests, I think, at that stage. Obviously I'm looking at what they've done in past roles and what impact they've driven, and I don't care if that impact is with data or not. Mm-hmm. It could be any type of impact. I mean, if you give a competent person any project, like they'll be able to figure it out. And so if they've driven impact at other companies, like I'm going to assume that, they didn't always know how to do whatever they did, but they put in the time and effort to learn how to do that. And, that is what is the biggest deal to me, rather than, the skills that someone has coming into an organization. I mean, the fact of the matter is, the interview doesn't last forever. I'm not going to be able to test someone's skills, and most of the people are embellishing their skills anyway. So,
true.
And I don't want to think that, I'm going to hire this person and they're going to solve all my problems. Just like, a piece of software isn't going to implement itself and then just magically work. It's the same thing with people. Like, I look more at drive than anything else, because, if the drive is there, then they'll put in the time and effort to, solve the problem that you're hiring them to solve.
Yeah, no, that's a really good point. I think it also kind of relates. Bernice was asking about how she is a trained scientist, but is having trouble. Does a lot of analytics there, right, which is by definition of what you do as a scientist. I'm sure I'm going to get comments about that comment, but why is there? Anyway, getting some feedback. But basically, how, for someone with a science background, how do you have that conversation about, actually, I do data analytics, but she's having trouble making that transition, having that conversation of how she's a good fit for this kind of role. What should someone like that do to show that they're ready to apply for data science roles?
Yeah, that's a really good question. At my last company, I got kind of lucky because we had policies in place that sort of allowed you to go out there and find side projects, but you don't necessarily need that to happen, right? Like, another really good way to find a job, and in fact, the way I found my last 2 roles was reaching out to the person on LinkedIn, because they were not internal to my company, and contacting them before even knowing if they had a job available. I would suggest doing the same thing at your own company. There's probably a person working on what you want to work on out there. Grab coffee with them, grab lunch, buy them lunch or coffee, and talk to them about it and say, just tell them you're super interested in it. I mean, especially now with, a lot of companies hurting from COVID, probably had layoffs happen in the past few months or going to happen. Like, everybody's going to be short staffed. So if you're super interested in something, nobody's going to deny help. When I was at Here, like, we had a major resource shortage. I mean, the problem we were trying to solve, it was a 10,000 person company. There were 756 applications at the company, and there was no data governance or centralized data warehouse. We had 3 people. So we definitely needed help. And, people came to us, I think we had 3 or 4 people that weren't officially on our team, but were giving us 5 to 10% of their time a week to help out on projects that were related to their department and related to our department. So we were working together to solve problems. And, after I left, I'm pretty sure one of those 4 people came onto the team. I don't think they took my role, but, they created a role for that person because, we were able to see how skilled they were. And they were able to, gain experience through that way. So I think that's, the best way to do it is pet projects that you can show off your skills go a long way. And, that networking aspect is really important. And, it's just a coffee or it's just lunch. It's not too hard to get someone to commit to that.
No, yeah, that's a good point. That's the one thing that I think we learn a little bit too late in life, but have that personal intro. Honestly, I moved to Chicago about 3 years ago. And honestly, I just emailed or I LinkedIn'd hundreds of people, but I was shocked by the number of people who would, I'd say, I want to learn more about the tech scene in Chicago. Here's my background. I'd love to jump on a call for 20 minutes. I had lawyers giving me whole billable hours, telling me which Excel to go to, all this kind of stuff. And I was like, I don't understand. People are nice, but actually, if you do that, yes, sometimes people don't respond and it can be a numbers game, but doing the outreach, if you can get that one coffee and put a face to a name, I think it's really amazing. And
if you're reaching out to someone external, you'll need to have a good pitch set up to grab their attention, that gets them interested in why they should talk to you. But it's much easier internally at the company. People are inclined to respond.
Yeah, exactly. It never hurts to reach out, honestly, as long as the ask isn't something that's crazy. It's not get me a job, and it's just, hey, I want to know about what you do. People like talking about themselves, so it's always easy. And I think the other thing that I think is a challenge that a lot of people face is there's a lot of people who I think they're not necessarily trying to become data scientists, right? They're marketing managers or product managers or in finance, and you just want to learn a little bit to become either a better manager or cut through some of the jargon. Is there a particular, this is going to be a tough question, but a particular skill that you should be learning, or what's the first thing you should start reading if you want to say become a better data-driven manager, or you want to be able to talk to your data science team?
That is a tough question because you're not really trying to find any of the hard skills. I mean, if you were asking me, if I want to do more things with data, obviously if you don't know Excel, I would say start there. Next is SQL, and then after that, probably Python, finally R. Mm-hmm. But when you're at the management level and you just want to figure out how the world of data works, there's a couple data strategy books out there. I think this is a book, blog, article answer, right? That's the type of material that you need to be reading in order to understand this stuff. And then I would still suggest getting your feet wet with some type of SQL boot camp. And I say this because you can read all the theory about tables and joins and stuff, but it's going to be really hard to understand without that hands-on experience. Yeah. But once you have it, a lot of other things make a lot more sense. And this is from a data analyst perspective, data visualization, and data science, AI and machine learning. Because that was probably a big issue that I had at here was that people, often just a lot of people, and this is any organization really, not everybody's going to be a data expert, but they want like the final product, right? And so they want the visualization, even though they don't have the data engineering in place. The data pipeline's not built, but they want that final product. And
that's a big one.
If they had done their homework and understand what goes into, having a data strategy and, having that pipeline built, they'd be a lot better managers, I think, just because, it's a lot of work, and there's a lot of work on the front end really before you get any results, right?
Yeah, exactly. And I would even say that that works both ways as well, because one of the common questions that we also get, especially from people who are more technical, is they'll say, well, why doesn't the manager or business partner understand how important this is, or whatever? And so much of that is understanding, well, what's their goal? And doing about that 5% of work to show that you're really putting that in. Folks, if anyone has any more questions, we've got time for one more. So feel free to throw that into the comments, and we'll get that in. Otherwise, any parting advice for anyone?
Let's see. There was one question that you asked that I don't think we really got to, and it was about what does being a data scientist at a big company, or how does it differ from being a data scientist at a big company to a small company? And I think it's an important distinction that everybody could gain some benefit from. But at a startup, a data scientist, and I'll back up even a little bit more. If you asked me what the job of a data scientist was 3 years ago, my answer would be centered around, artificial intelligence, machine learning. They are building models to test out a thesis that they have created. The world over the past few years has changed the definition of data scientist, and now it's just, solving problems with data. It's, the scientist part of it has become less important. That job still exists, obviously. In some cases, it's called an AI engineer, machine learning engineer, or maybe data scientist core. So it's still there, but the smaller the company is, the more responsibility in the data world the data science person they hire has. And what I mean by that is, if you look at the full data spectrum, you start with collecting data, you move to you move that data, transform it, you explore that data, so analyzing it, you visualize it and aggregate it to the correct level you need, and then finally you're doing the learning and optimizing the AI pieces of it. And so at a startup, the data scientist does all of those things, from start to finish. Build something to collect data, build something to move that data into a data warehouse, analyze it, aggregate it, and then run some models on it so you can learn from it. As the company gets bigger and they have more resources, generally you'll start breaking that apart, right? Like you'll get a software engineer that builds software that collects the data. You'll get a data engineer that is moving and transforming that data, storing it in the right type of database, and things like that. You'll have a data analyst that analyzes it, a visualization expert that aggregates it and visualizes the things, building dashboards. And then finally, you'll have that data science person who's, doing the AI and the machine learning. Where you don't want to be is in a trap where you're at like a 350 person company that they're hiring their first data person, and they expect you to build visualizations, your second week on the job, and it's like whoa, like you haven't built anything, and like you hired me as a data scientist and you want me to use AI. Like we're starting so far ahead of where we should be. It's not even funny, and I might not even be the right person for the job because I expected to be a data scientist, and you have 50 applications and none of them are talking to each other.
Yeah, and that's. I mean, I think touches one of the questions I asked earlier about different kinds of data roles, and the question gets asked frequently: the difference between data science and data analytics.
Yeah.
And people mix and match those, unfortunately. But I think you're right. That's a big challenge that companies have. I think a lot of companies don't know what they're looking for when they say data scientist.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's true. I mean, that's the biggest mistake companies make is, they didn't do their due diligence in understanding what the world of data should look like. And so they just go and hire a data analyst and expect, the world of them and are disappointed when it doesn't work out.
Or they have the opposite problem where they're like, someone just needs to do some basic SQL queries and then they want a scientist. And
right.
when that person gets
and then they're overskilled. Yeah.
Yeah, they're bored. Last question here from Annie. She asks what resource do you recommend for doing more advanced in SQL or learning SQL?
So that's a tough one for me because I learned on the job. But Data Camp is what I've been using for Python, and they have Python, R, and SQL courses, and it's a really good combination of videos, reading, and then tasks, and then they have some projects in there too that you can take a step back and work on them. But it's something that you just got to do every day. And another great thing that they have is access to real data sets, and so working with different data sets is really going to help you from a SQL's perspective, and just from understanding data in theory and understanding what type of aggregation you need, or how to, or why you can't join certain data sets because they're at different levels, and what you would need to do in those types of situations. So I personally think that's the one I'm using now. I'm sure 2 years from now I'll be using something different.
Yeah, that's true. Well, that's all super helpful. Shameless plug. Promotable also has courses that
yeah, I was going to say, I know.
So,
Promotable, I haven't used them yet.
Right? I mean, we don't do ours aren't at your own pace. They're live and interactive. So I think I always tell people, watch the YouTube videos, do the free classes, and then when you have questions, if you're like, hey, how do I do this? How does this relate to my role, or what have you? Then you want to take a class with someone who you can say, hey, I don't get this. Can you show me how to do this again? And then, to me, that's when it makes the most sense. But
yeah, I'll actually add in, it's really great to do a live and in-person one, where you can ask questions to an expert, and then on the side doing these self-paced boot camps. You're hearing two different perspectives from it, and that is super helpful with data because nobody has really simplified it enough where it's learning how to add and subtract yet. So
yeah,
I think having those perspectives is important.
Yeah, you need all the practice you can get. That's for sure. Different perspectives. That's why we do stuff like this. We can have the same topic that 20 different people from different companies and different roles, and you learn so much. So thanks again. I've taken almost an hour of your time. I mean, just based on the engagement alone, I think everyone really loved it. So
glad to hear it.
Thanks so much for joining. Give us a like on LinkedIn. We'd really appreciate it. Feel free to comment as well. If there's other stuff that you guys want to learn about or see, let me know. So drop that in the comments. We'll be posting this recording to our YouTube channel. I'll be setting up that link as well. So feel free to come by and watch again. And then hopefully we'll see you guys at the next one. Thanks so much.
Yep. Thanks a bunch, everybody. And, reach out to me on LinkedIn. I'm sure Aaron will post my profile.
Absolutely. All righty.